All right, so we'll start with Curtis. Once a Silicon Valley software engineer, Curtis Chen now writes stories and runs puzzle games near Portland, Oregon. He's the author of the Kangaroo series of funny science fiction spy thrillers, and he has written for the Realm Originals 9-Step Station, Machina, and Echo Park 2016, which is forthcoming. Curtis's short stories have appeared in Playboy Magazine, Daily Science Fiction, Oregon Reads Aloud, and elsewhere. His homebrew cat-feeding robot was displayed in the Worlds Beyond Here exhibit at Seattle's Wing Museum, and I will be asking you about that later. All right.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's hear a little about yourself and about what you're going to read for us.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, and thanks also to Diane for helping to run the session. Thanks to the libraries for hosting this event. This is really cool. And also thanks to Vintage Books for handling book sales. So any thing that you hear authors reading or anything they talk about this weekend, please support your local independent bookstore. Yeah, I'm Curtis Chen. I have been writing for a while, and I've been publishing for a shorter time than I've been writing, which I think is usually the case. And I'm gonna, I haven't timed this reading, but I think it's going to be less than the 15 minutes, which is good because we're like 3 minutes in now. Anyway, yeah, so the Kangaroo books are these funny science fiction spy thrillers. So there are 2 out now. I don't know if Vintage has them in stock, but I've got a bunch in my garage, so I could always sell them on consignment and sign them to whoever you want. Yeah, I've been working on a bunch of other stuff, as Melanie mentioned in the bio. The stuff with Realm has been interesting because that's collaborative, so I'm working with a team of writers, and on Echo Park I was the lead, so I helped put together the team. So I was really happy with the people we got and the work that we got to do. One of those people was Sloan Leong, who is going to be on a panel tomorrow morning at 10. I know Sunday at 10 is a little early. Sure is for me, but I'm happy to do it because it's a panel all about creating comics and graphic novels. And Sloan, in addition to being a great writer, is also an awesome artist. So she has written and illustrated a few of her own graphic novels, one of which was up for an award this year. So that's really cool. I'm looking forward to chatting with those folks. Yeah, but what I'm going to read to you today, this is a news story that is not out yet. And it's going to be in an anthology. Unfortunately, I just heard from one of the editors that the anthology is going to be delayed. It was supposed to be out in December. Looks like it's going to be next spring now because of various production issues, paper shortages, things like that. But it is going to happen. And I'm really happy with this. This is my first tie-in story. So it's a media tie-in. So I'm writing in a universe that already exists that has been seen in like movies and other books. And I'm not going to tell you what it is if you don't already know, so you can guess from what I'm going to read. And as I mentioned to the organizers, this is going to be a teen-friendly reading. So hopefully there are no people younger than like 13-ish here. So I have you'll get the idea. I've cleaned up the language a little bit. But I'm gonna just hold up this handy little poop emoji whenever I'm saying something that is not in the originals. So if you want all the salty language, you got to go buy the anthology and to read the whole story, because I'm gonna get through the first few pages here. All right, so here we go. So the title of the story is Better Luck to Borrow. Lily Shaw was not looking forward to her high school science fair. It had been a totally poopy year. First, her parents moved them to this colony planet in the middle of nowhere, chasing another company bonus that never materialized. Lily had to deal with being the new kid yet again, plus the only person of Southeast Asian descent in her class. Then her parents died in a power loader accident that also crushed Lily's left hand, and her prosthetic replacement introduced new ways for the other kids to tease and torment her. The only good news was that the company was hosting the science fair on their private island and sailing the whole class out there on a big fancy yacht. That meant a whole day away from the smoggy and sweltering company town that was ironically named Fairwind Colony. And if Lily was lucky, if the deal she was planning to make today was successful, she'd never have to go back to the ramshackle barracks where she was now housed. She'd have a ticket off this dead-end world and back to civilization. But as soon as the yacht cleared harbor and the teenagers' initial excitement at sailing away passed, the bullying began again. "Hey, Lily, could you give us a hand here?" Lily checked the time. Not even a minute since their science teacher, Mr. Ohijo, had gone below to check on motion-sick Aaron Baxter, leaving the rest of his students unsupervised on deck. Taylor Wernicke was the instigator, of course. She'd been Lily's nemesis ever since Lily started scoring higher than Taylor on Ohijo's organic chemistry tests. Lily turned around to face Taylor, who stood next to an artfully arranged picnic spread provided by Taylor's well-to-do parents for this special outing, on a round table in the center of the deck, surrounded by their gawking classmates. "I do your homework because you pay me, Taylor," Lily said flatly. She would have refused if she didn't need the money. "Get someone else to do the manual labor." "But I just want to borrow you for a second." Taylor held up a jar of gourmet gherkins. "You're the strongest here, Lily. Everyone knows that. Can't you do us this one teensy favor?" Lily stepped closer to the table. "What's in it for me?" Taylor's plastic smile faltered for a split second. "How about you don't look like a party pooper in front of everyone?" Lily realized she had an opportunity to get back at her tormentor and smiled in return. "Sure, Tay-Tay, hand it over." Taylor held out the jar. Lily used her right hand to grab it by the bottom and then clamped her robotic left hand, a prosthetic controlled by her brain, around the top. She paused to adjust her grip, then squeezed hard enough to crumple the lid and shatter the jar. Glass rained all over the expensive picnic, and brine splashed Taylor's sundress. "What the poop?" the blonde screeched. Lily enjoyed the moment as she dropped the broken jar into a now soggy pile of macaroons and said sarcastically, "Oops, guess I don't know my own strength." "What is happening up here?" Mr. Ohijo shouted. The science teacher stood in the doorway leading up from the yacht's interior, mouth hanging open. Lily and Taylor started talking over each other. Ohijo waved his hands. "I don't want to know." Taylor pouted. "But Mr. Ohijo, you asked." "Forget it. Taylor, did you bring a change of clothes?" "I have a swimsuit." Ohijo turned to one of the boys. "Zach, give your girlfriend your jacket." It was Zach's turn to pout. "But it's getting cold out here. Looks like a storm coming." "Exactly why Taylor shouldn't be standing around in wet clothing. Take her to the washroom to get changed." Ohijo pointed at Lily. "You, go below and fix your hand." "What? My hand's fine." Lily rotated her prosthetic in a full circle at the wrist for effect. "Your other hand, Lily." Lily looked at her right palm and saw some small cuts from the broken glass. "Oh, you know where the first aid kit is. The rest of you, let's clean up this mess. Safety first." Lily headed for the door into the yacht's main cabin, smiling to herself. She would have needed to sneak away from the group at some point anyway to take care of her private business deal, and now she could kill two birds with one stone. And I'm going to stop there because it is getting close to the half-hour mark. So
That was
is
an admirable Mean Girl accent that you did there. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it was October 3rd last weekend. So does anyone, since we have a couple minutes, does anyone have, if you don't know already, does anyone have a guess about which franchise that is, which universe that is set in? Feel free to unmute and just yell it out if you have a.
It reminded me of
No.
Cinder a little bit, but that can't be right.
Of which?
Cinder. That couldn't be
Cinder.
right.
Oh, from Marissa Meyer.
Mhm.
Sure. No,
She
good
didn't
guess.
have the visual.
Not that. No. But yeah, that's a really fun series. If people haven't read those, the Lunar Chronicles. I think Cinder is the first one. Is that right?
Yep.
And there's a whole series, and they even like have turned them into graphic novels now, which is really cool. I'll just tell you, so
Yeah.
you don't have to wonder. We could talk about this. We could talk about how this happened, because this was kind of an unexpected opportunity. But that is set in the Aliens versus Predator universe. And I wasn't sure, because they approached a few different authors and asked us to pitch stories to them. I was like, if I'm going to write an Alien versus Predator story, I'm gonna write one about a teenage girl, because we haven't seen enough of those in that particular franchise, and I feel like there's something to be said there. So anyway, and also it's a science fair for specific reasons, because I wanted to do a thing.
Curtis?
So hopefully people will check that out.
Hey, Curtis, somebody
Yeah.
was asking, what is the name of your anthology?
Oh, the name of the anthology, and well, here's the cover. It is Aliens versus Predator Ultimate Prey, and it's got, I think, like maybe 15 or so stories in here. So yeah, they got a lot of much bigger names than me to write. So Delilah Dawson has a story in here, and Mira Grant, also known as Shauna McGuire. I'm really curious to see what her story is like. She's written an Alien tie-in novel. I believe that was Echo. But this is Alien versus Predator, which I learned through the editorial process is different than either the aliens by themselves or the predators by themselves. Like it's its own thing. And yeah, I learned a lot. But it was an interesting experience.
I'm glad you told us. I never would have guessed that. I mean, I don't have to say that, I suppose. Everyone knows I wouldn't have guessed it.
Yeah,
But-
no, it's all good. Yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll stick around at the end if people have questions for other things, but thank you so much.
Excellent. All right, Debbie, you're up. Debby Dodds is the author of the novel Amish Guys Don't Call, on the list Best YA of 2017 by Powell's Books. There it is. It's featured in Random House is Better with Books, and it's an Amazon Top 100 in YA category. Well done. She won first place in Portland's Wizard World 2017 Fiction Contest. As an actress, she wrote and performed in stage shows at both Disneyland and Disney World. Debbie has stories in 20 anthologies, including the New York Times bestselling My Little Red Book, that was from Hatchet. She received a BFA from NYU in drama and acting and an MFA in creative writing from Antioch University. Hi, Debbie. Tell us about yourself and what you're going to read. You might be muted, Debbie. You're muted, Debbie. Hang on. There we go.
Do that
Hi.
a lot. Hi, I'm so sorry. I thought we were starting at 11:30, so I think I'm a little late, but I'm glad I'm here. And I'm going to read just from the first chapter of Amish Guys Don't Call. And yeah, if you're not familiar with the Amish people, I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and the Amish make up a large percentage or a medium-sized percentage of the population of Lancaster. They're not only in Lancaster, there are also Amish groups in Ohio and other places. Afterwards, I'm happy to answer any questions about the Amish, because at this point I feel like I'm an expert in the Amish, but I'll go ahead and read. It wasn't like we saw them pull up in a horse and buggy or anything, but their Amishness was unmistakable. Madison and I couldn't help but stare at the group of teens in odd-fitting clothing shuffling into the movie theater lobby. Huddled so close together, they almost moved like a single organism. A dead giveaway to their status as plain folks was the guys sported bowl haircuts and the girls had hair hanging down past their armpits. One girl's was pulled severely into two braids that hung almost to her elbows, without any sense of irony. Standing in line at the concessions, we watched them scurry by. Madison wiggled her eyebrows at me. Look, even the Amish girls have boyfriends, Sam. Madison nudged me a little, teasing. I smiled at her, stealing another glance at the back of the Amish kids, because surreptitious subgroups of society had always intrigued me. Madison caught my eye again and held it. And you're way hotter than they are. A hell of a lot hotter than you give yourself credit for. I couldn't help but feel a thrill when she said this, like I had Mexican soda running through my veins, the kind of cola made with pure cane sugar. She had my back like nobody else ever had before. Madison Caulfield was the kind of friend I'd always craved. Beautiful, stylish, funny. She had it all figured out. This time, I wasn't letting opportunities pass me by like I was a hunk of inert matter. I wanted to change, to be reactive and a bonding chemical like carbon. I was ready to make connections. But I also knew Madison's friends had to be convinced I was worthy to hang out with them. So I needed to lay off the dorky analogies like the carbon thing I just did there. I know, Mad, but I keep telling you, the guys at our school, I don't know what to talk to them about. I don't like deer hunting or the Penn State Nittany Lions or goofing around all afternoon in a quarry. We moved forward 2 inches in the popcorn line, though nobody had left. The kids at the counter seemed to be having serious issues deciding between Whoppers and Milk Duds. Please, at least you'd moved here last winter. I've known these idiots since elementary school when they used to pick their noses and try and wipe it on me. Madison rolled her eyes. Lancaster County was the kind of place where people lived for generations, so everyone knew each other, and one person's aunt was another's godmother. The guys weren't any better at my old school in Philly. I didn't want to talk too much about my experiences at any of the 3 different schools I went to in King of Prussia because I knew an air of mystique always trumped the scent of loser. Also, Madison's clique seemed to like that I lived in a big city, not the suburb of a big city. Look, finding guys is easy. You just need to know where to look. Madison's eyes glittered, playing with me again. She knew all the partying she and her friends did freaked me out even more than the pressure that they put on me to date. She coolly appraised my rapid blinking. Then a smile broke over her face, like a pink dye spreading through silk. Oh, Saint Sam, Plan P is supposed to be fun. If you wanted to stay home watching old Firefly reruns on Hulu, eating sharp cheddar cheese all the time, you wouldn't have started hanging out with us, right? I laughed. She stuck out her tongue, but it didn't make her look like a petulant kid as much as it did a 1940s pinup girl. Fun is good. I like fun. Fun can be... Mercifully, my babbling was cut short by our turn to order our sodas and popcorn. So there's not a lot about the romance that ends up happening, but Sam actually ends up falling for an Amish guy, but she doesn't know he's an Amish guy. He's on his period of Rumspringa. And so he's trying to be as non-Amish as he can. But he's actually kind of at the point where he's decided he's not going back to being Amish. I got a quick question for you. How many people think that in your teenage period, if you were Amish and you get to not be Amish and you get to drive a car and go to the movies because they don't have electricity, they can't play video games, they have a horse and buggy, you know, they have to wear very specific clothes with suspenders and dresses. The girls must always wear dresses. It's very gender specifics. A lot of things that we take for granted. The Amish are very old school, Old Testament biblical on things. How many of you think that there'd be a big attrition rate? And what percent do you think would, when they get out into the world, would go, oh my gosh, this is what I want instead of being Amish? Just wondering if anyone wants to post in the chat.
I know it's low. I don't know the exact percentage, but it seems like I was wondering if you were going to explain Rumspringa too. So I'm glad that you went in there.
Yeah. So it's less than 3%. Less than 3%. And part of that comes from the fact that if you do leave, your friends and family will shun you, which means they probably won't talk to you. Maybe they might talk to you a little bit, like once a year or something like that, just to check in with you. You won't be able to go home for holidays, although Amish people don't really celebrate holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas or things like that. But you wouldn't really be able to have a strong relationship with them again. The other thing is when Amish people get away And they're having their Rumspringa. They're usually 17, 18 years old, and they've had no exposure. So they go all in. And I've actually been to parties where Amish people have thrown them in the cornfields, and drugs, alcohol, like it's the craziest bacchanalia some Amish students or Amish young people have. Zach, the character in my book, he wants to leave because he wants to get an education, and you're not allowed to go to school past the 8th grade if you're Amish. And even that, you're not really allowed to read most mainstream books. The science is very truncated, obviously no Darwinism. The history is very truncated because they're pacifists, but they won't even study war or things like that. And so it's a very biblical history that they learn. So yeah, if somebody wants to, read books and learn about the world, you can't really stay in the Amish community and do too much of that. Did anyone have any other questions? So yeah, obviously it's a very Romeo and Juliet type of story because non-Amish people don't date Amish people, and Amish people don't date non-Amish people, even after they leave. Usually Amish people become Mennonite and they date other Mennonites, which is a little bit more permissive religion. So yeah, I didn't know if anyone had anything in the chat that they wanted to ask a question
You
about.
got a big wow at one point. What was that for, LeeAnn? Do you recall? No.
Oh, that was for the cat. Sorry.
Oh.
But also, I always enjoy Debbie's readings, and she knows so much about all this. Debbie, maybe you could talk a little bit about what made you want to write about the Amish folk.
Yeah, I was curious.
How was that your inspiration, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, so I moved there. I moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania when I was in 5th grade. And I think that that's such a cool age for the world, because you're really starting to look outside and see what's going on around you. And I moved from Binghamton to New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I lived right in the city in Binghamton. So similar to Sam living in Philadelphia. And when I moved there, I was like, what is going on? There are people riding in horse and buggies and this old-fashioned clothing, and their dolls don't have faces, and all of this stuff that was so different. Even in the 80s, I was watching TV when I got home from school, and doing things that the Amish could do, going to the movie theater, things like that. And nowadays even more so because of technology. It was interesting when the book came out, which is kind of a funny pun title, like Amish Guys Don't Call. I did have somebody who wrote to me and they said, well, some Amish do have phones, and that's true, but they use them solely for business. They can have a radio too out in the barn to check for a storm coming or something like that, so that they can protect their cows. And it's not that they're anti-technology, they just don't want to be part of the world. They actively want to separate themselves as much as possible. So they can actually get in a car and ride with somebody, but they can't own the car, because owning the car is like a status thing. It could be a status thing. And so they can't own the car, but they can get in a car and somebody's going to drive them somewhere or something like that. They can do that. They ride trains if they need to get to see family. They will use a phone to, if they have a quilting business or something like that, that they need the phone for.
Debbie,
Yeah.
somebody's asking in the chat if you ever had a close Amish friend when you were growing up.
So my brother worked for an Amish family through his soccer coach, who was Scottish, and oddly, the Amish people feel very comfortable with Scottish people. So there was that. But I almost dated somebody who at the time I thought was old order Mennonite. And actually I didn't know that. When I met him, I couldn't figure out why he wasn't asking me out. And I ran into him many times at this under 21 dance club, and wondering what, I gave him my phone number. He wouldn't call me. Finally, his cousin said they don't have a phone in their house. They're old order Mennonite. They don't own a phone. And I said, oh, And that was it. Like, that's the end of the story. Well, sort of the end of the story. But when I was writing this book, I decided to make it Amish because I thought that was clearer for people. It was a little bit more extreme, and I was fictionalizing it anyway. Come to find out, after I wrote the book, my mother, who's a librarian, because librarians are the best people in the world, did some research and found a TED Talk by this particular person. And he's a millionaire many times over, the guy who kind of inspired the story. But the weirdest thing was he was actually raised Amish, and his family had just become Old Order Mennonite around the time that I met him. So he actually was Amish, which is a very weird thing when you think you're fictionalizing something and then you find out you didn't fictionalize it. It was actually, that's really what was happening. So that was kind of odd.
Wow. So
Yeah.
I just want you to know, Curtis, she said Firefly. I know what that is. So, okay. Growing up in Fort Worth, Texas, LeeAnn Elwood McLennan was always looking for any opportunity to read, under the covers in bed, in the car, and in class, using the book hidden in the textbook trick. But her father introduced her to sci-fi fantasy through a book of short stories from Astounding Stories. The possibilities in every word captivated her interest, and her daydreams involved other worlds, magical powers, and time travel. Despite graduating from Clemson University with a degree in English, LeeAnn has spent her career working in computer engineering related fields. Hi, LeeAnn. Tell us about yourself and what you're going to read.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I think this is my 3rd year in this festival, and it's just such a lovely festival. So thank you again. You guys do a great job. Even when we had to switch to virtual last year, well done. I am a writer of fantasy novels, and my current trilogy that's out is The Supernormal Legacy. And I'm going to read from book 1, which is Dormant. And you can see Root and Emerge behind me, sort of, there's a bit of a glare. It is a young adult fantasy, sort of a superhero, well, completely a superhero, my idea of superheroes in our world. The inspiration for it came when I was watching Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, and I was reflecting on how so many superheroes, Spider-Man, Batman, become superheroes in part because of a family tragedy. They start out as what I would call a normal person. And then something happens that triggers this impulse. And instead of becoming villains, they become people who help folks. Obviously, like I said, Batman and Spider-Man rather, not Superman, are good examples, but there's definitely other ones. So I started reflecting, what if someone was born into a superhero type family, was born into a family of powers, and then at a young age had a family tragedy related to those powers? What might they do? And so I created my character Olivia Woodson, who is born into a family of superpowered people, and they tend to do good deeds. And when she's 7 years old, she sees her mother rescuing children, and her mother is killed. And so she rejects the idea of being a superhero and is like, nope, I'm gonna just be a normal person, forget about this stuff. And now my series starts when she's 14 years old, and she's successfully submerged her powers, if you will. And so everything kind of comes from there. I'm going to read a couple of different sections, and I'll kind of introduce each one. So I'm going to start with kind of the beginning of the series, and then I'll go from there. Definitely let me know if you have questions, and we will get started. So reading from chapter 1 of Dormant, and it's all in first person. So I crouched behind the table in the bank lobby, cradling my unconscious boyfriend and watching the robbers yell and wave their guns about. One of the masked men slapped a bag in front of the teller window and demanded all of the money in the cash drawers. Another man, wearing a gray ski mask, shoved the bank manager toward the vault. The security guard lay dead in front of the bank entrance. Blood dribbled down the side of Jack's face where one of the robbers had clobbered him for refusing to give up his cell phone. I glanced at the bag holding our cell phones in the middle of the floor and then at the robber yelling at the teller. I was sure I saw blood on the barrel of his gun. The woman next to me was crying and saying over and over, "Someone make them stop." Crap, she had to go there. I could have stopped the bank robbers easily if things had been different, if I hadn't rejected my so-called destiny and most of my family 7 years ago at my birthday party. My eyes strayed to the last robber who stood near the ATMs. He had barely moved since the criminals had burst into the lobby. What was he waiting for? This was a robbery. Shouldn't he be robbing? My mom would have wasted no time jumping into action. I imagined her springing silently over the table, knocking out the first robber, and then swinging from the light fixtures to attack the other robbers from above. Then she would have brought Jack back to consciousness and found a way to bring the security guard back to life. Okay, maybe that last part wouldn't have happened. I took Jack's hand. It lay limp in mine. I tried to calculate how long he'd been unconscious, but I was so shaken up by the suddenness of the robbery and the quick succession of them demanding our phones, making us cower on the floor, and Jack getting knocked out that my sense of time was off. Jack was so pale and still, I was worried he might have a concussion. It didn't matter what Mom would have done. My mom couldn't do anything because she was dead at the hands of terrorists while she was trying to save 30 school children. I was one of those school children. My powers weren't very strong yet, but I still ran to help her. When she saw me, her eyes widened in fear and her shield slipped just a little. But it was enough for the blast from the bombs to hit her, sending her spinning deeper into the inferno. My last memory of Mom was her yelling at me, "Run, Olivia, run!" And shame on me, I ran to safety along with all of the other children. That's when I decided there was no way in hell I was ever going to follow in my mother's family's footsteps. I wasn't going to be like my grandfather, my uncles, or my mom. I wasn't going to be a supernormal, nothing crappier than a life of pain and secrecy, coupled with an ungrateful public and an early death. But in the dark of night, I could admit my guilt. Mom would still be alive if I hadn't distracted her. The first robber yelled at the bank teller, "Hurry up, damn it." He glanced in the direction of the vault and shouted at the gray masked robber, "Dude, get your ass in gear." The teller was shaking as she shoved money into the bag. She dropped some on the floor and bent to pick it up. I heard her retching. I wanted this to be over. I wanted Jack to be okay. I wanted to go back to the normal life I'd been pursuing for the past 7 years. Since I'd rejected my destiny at 7, the normal course of events, full abilities manifesting at 13, intensive training and mentoring by another supernormal, my first challenge, hadn't happened. Somehow I'd managed to reject my potential abilities such that they were a ghost of what they would have been. I got to be a normal kid, albeit one with a dead mother and a sad father who didn't know about my mother's powers or mine. The supernormal side of the family barely acknowledged me, though I got rather pointed presents from them on birthdays, X-Men comics, collector's swords, and the latest Batman movie. I leaned forward and my long hair brushed Jack's chest. Another reminder of how I was different from my family. Long hair, tight jeans, wide cuff bracelets, and revealing tops. All typical attire for a high school student, but my mom never would have allowed me to have long hair, too easy to grab in a fight, and tight jeans, forget about it. It's hard to make a flying leap if you're worried that your jeans might split. And as for bracelets, I could hear Mom saying, "I'm not Wonder Woman. I don't need bracelets to stop bullets." So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the chapter. In the part I'm skipping, Olivia has kind of given nicknames to the different robbers. She's called them like Gray Mask or Frozen Guy, kind of just to help her identify them and also based on their activities. And in the meantime, Jack has regained consciousness and she's sort of updated him on what's going on. And people are kind of getting restless and scared and so forth. So this is a little bit later in the chapter and Jack is awake. Jack shifted beside me and I saw him watching the construction worker who was trying to get into position to take down one of the robbers. Great. Now Jack would feel like he had to help the man. I gripped his hand and he looked at me. I shook my head slightly and he shook his head back, rejecting my warning. Before I knew it, he stood up and staggered to the middle of the lobby, holding his head and moaning. Gray Mask jerked around with his gun aimed at Jack. I scrabbled over to Jack on my hands and knees to shield him. If I had my full powers, I could have stopped a bullet for him. But now all I could do was hope Gray Mask wouldn't shoot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the construction workers slip closer behind Gray Mask. To distract the robbers, I started crying. My tears weren't completely fake, and I had to fight the urge to give in to a crying Jack. Stop it! Everyone froze when Gray Mask snapped out the terse statement. He whirled around, pulled the trigger, and the construction worker dropped without a word. The gunshot echoed around the lobby and someone screamed. I gasped. And then my heart almost stopped when he aimed the gun at Jack. No heroes. How do you know you're not going to kill us all anyway? Jack snapped. Gray Mask shrugged and waved his gun from side to side. Maybe, maybe not. I wiped the tears from my face and reached for Jack's hand. He gripped mine tightly and gave me a comforting smile. He shifted, preparing to do something heroic. I sighed inwardly. My options were narrowing. I stood up slowly, Jack's hand slipping from mine, my heart pounding and blood rushing to my head. All eyes and guns were on me. I swallowed hard. Ollie, what are you doing? Jack asked, sounding panicked and trying to grab my hand. I stepped away from him and faced Gray Mask and Frozen Guy, who were both watching me. Gray Mask with a sardonic quirk to his mouth and Frozen Guy with eyes wide. Let everyone go now. You can finish up without us. I tried to sound confident, like Mom would have in this type of situation. Oh yeah? Gray Mask grinned. He raised his gun and said, certainly without you. Everything slowed down. I heard the gunfire and Frozen Guy yelled, Olivia, no. I saw the bullet moving towards me. If I ducked, it would go past me and hit Jack. I breathed in fear and my breath filled all the corners of my body. In the space of that breath and the next, I begged for help from my dormant powers, drawing on the faint stirrings I'd ignored for so long and asking for more. As I breathed out, power filled me as if the breath leaving my body made space for it. I felt electric. Everything, even the air around me, was sharper and clearer than anything I'd ever experienced. I had awakened my powers and I felt complete, like the last puzzle piece had been put in place inside me. I reached out and felt my hand harden like armor. I plucked the bullet out of the air and noticed the sensation of heat in my hand before flinging it down where it buried itself in the floor. And I'll stop there. You have to read the book to find out what happens next. All about the cliffhanger. I really enjoyed writing this series. It was interesting to write a trilogy when I didn't mean to start a trilogy. It was supposed to be a standalone book. And as I wrote it, I realized it would be a trilogy. I don't ever recommend writing a trilogy without planning it out first. Some of us will know that as writers. But it was ultimately a really rewarding and exciting experience. And I had a lot of support from my writing group and from other writers around the area. So it was very cool. So thank you for the opportunity to read.
So
yeah.
This is my question first. For those who are not writers, what happens?
What happens in the book or just in general?
What happens when you jump in and pant your way through it?
So you just have to, you realize partway through the last book that all the things you've been setting up for were not right. So I wrote half of the last book and realized that the whole big conclusion I was going to write made no sense whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And as Debbie, who's in my writing group, knows, I had to rewrite the first half of the last book to redo it. And I had to change my conclusion. And I'm glad I did. I ended up loving it so much more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
So it looks like we've got another question. What is everybody working on now? We'll start with Curtis.
Oh, I am revising a new original fantasy novel, so not in a series. My agent has the next Kangaroo book. He's looking at it, and we'll figure out what to do with it at some point. Everything is kind of slow now.
Are we allowed to ask for details, or is it spoilers, hush hush, we don't need to know right now?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are we allowed to ask for any details, or is it just, that would be a spoiler?
For Kangaroo?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. I will tell you. Okay, so the working title is True Blue Kangaroo, and if anyone's read the second book, there's a hint of, you might be able to figure out where it's going to be set mostly.
Got it.
Yeah, I've been trying to do a different kind of setting for each book.
Mm-hmm.
So this one's going to be on yet another different planet in the solar system. So not Earth and not Mars and not the moon.
Something new.
Yeah.
Debbie, you're up. What are you working on now?
One thing that I do as an author is I'm always working on short pieces, either fictional short stories or essays, so that when I have my time to write, I don't get writer's block, because I always have something I can pick. I can go, oh, well, I'm going to write on that. Or, and it's also just how my brain works too. I like to have a lot of things going at once. So I just finished second drafts of 2 short stories. One that I just submitted, one that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with. In fact, it might end up being something longer in the future. And then I'm also working on a novel, which is, I think, tentatively titled Where Monsters Hide. And it's not sci-fi though. It's actually, I guess, historical fiction. I guess things that are set in the 80s are now historical fiction, but it's about a girl who realizes that one of her neighbors is a Nazi, and through a friendship with this woman. So that's what I'm working on.
Based on something you read or somebody that you met? That almost sounds like a story of its own.
Yeah, almost everything has a little kernel of something that happened to me in it that I write. I just recently, one of the short stories I wrote was about somebody who works in a winery who gets tempted by the devil. I was never tempted by the devil. I've never worked in a winery, but I do attend wine tastings. So it kind of came from that idea. So it might not have anything to do. I'm not saying I hung out with Nazis when I was younger, but almost everything comes from some kernel of something that sticks in my mind from something I've experienced.
I apologize. That was perilously close to where do you get your ideas?
No, it's okay. I don't mind at all.
All right, LeeAnn, how about you?
Hi, I've got a couple of projects going on. My solo project that I'm working on is one that I went back and looked at it recently. I've been working on it in one way or another since 2007, so 2007 came out wrong. And it started out, it's a portal story, kind of a Narnia meets Wheel of Time type story, or Narnia meets Lord of the Rings, if you're more familiar with that. And it's actually done, but then I decided to change the ages of my main characters from 15 to 27 recently. So now I'm rewriting it, and I'm having the experience of changing it from a young adult fantasy to, I guess we'll call it adult fantasy, though that kind of sounds a little salacious. But we'll just say fantasy. But it's a really fun project, and it's got a lot of, the reason I kind of liken it to Wheel of Time is there's a lot of soul conversations, not like soul music, but souls, having souls or not having souls. I'm enjoying that project a lot, and it will be a trilogy, and I have planned it out better. Maybe I've learned the lessons. We shall see, though. Obviously, I have to write the other two books. And then I'm working on a collaboration project, my first ever collaboration with Karen Eisenberry. And I think I just mangled her last name. Sorry, Karen. And she writes superhero novels that take place in Seattle, and I write superhero novels that take place in Portland. We got together and decided to do a crossover where her characters come down to Portland and wackiness ensues. And it's been really fun. It's been our pandemic project. We started it in January 2020, and we had the experience of already writing together online with Google Docs, and we got to keep going. It was perfect. And I don't know that I could write with every other writer, but I have to say that Karen as a co-writer is incredibly generous and fun to write with. So it's been a great experience. Aw. So yeah, so that's what's going on with me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be daring and ask a question, and you're welcome to not answer. But what I'm wondering is, I'm thinking that everybody here is writing full time now. When did you know that you could quit the day job? Curtis, how about you?
I'm the wrong person to ask about that. I'm very atypical. So when my wife and I moved up here to the Northwest, we actually saved up some money and made the decision to completely, quit our jobs and totally change our lives, including moving out of, to a different state. Because we were both working pretty, pretty demanding jobs. And I'd been wanting to write for a few years at that point, but I was finding that it wasn't even so much the time, but just that the day job was taking a lot of mental and emotional energy from me, so that even when I had the time, I would want to do other things rather than sitting down at the computer again and doing more work like that. So we've been very fortunate that we were able to stretch our savings a lot. So I haven't had a day job since we moved out here. So I've been freelancing and I've had part-time gigs, but I'm really trying to make a go of the writing.
All right, Debbie, how about you? When did you know?
I haven't quit my day job.
Oh.
Now, I will say, even if I had a best-selling book with, one of the big 5 publishing companies, which unless you do, it's difficult to quit your job. If you're publishing with a small press, or that's what I publish with a small press, but self-publishing, things like that. Often you don't make enough money to quit your day job. But even if I did, I love my day job. I work as an academic tutor, and I teach writing classes, and I still do some acting part-time. So I love all the things that I do. I'm very lucky in that way. And so I don't know, I would say even if I won the lottery, I'd probably do some of this, because it keeps me active and creative and involved to have other things going on in my life.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also fall into the haven't quit my day job category, but I kind of echo what Debbie said. My day job, I'm actually still a computer engineer. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about computers and systems and networking and, you know, just all that stuff. And it's such a different side of my brain, sort of. I like that. Now, to also echo though what Curtis said, it does take a lot of energy. So I have to have the discipline to find the time to write, which is typically on the weekends. So, you know, there is that compromise that you have. When my first book got published, I felt very happy because I spent all this time writing and not hanging out with friends during that time and making certain time sacrifices that you do have to make. And it was nice to feel like it had paid off in that I had something to show for it. It was really satisfying. I don't know, like if I made it big, if I'd quit my day job, I might have to just in order to focus on writing. But what I kind of think of is I'll work and then retire, and then writing will be a thing I do as part of my retirement, just to have something exciting to do. Yeah. Curtis, do you have something to comment?
I just have a quick redirect, which is people like if you, like, a lot of writers will say this, but if you're not in a position where you need to quit your day job because the writing has become so demanding on your time, please keep your day job, because you're probably getting health insurance with that.
Well, completely valid. Yeah.
That is super important, especially right now.
Right.
My
right.
God.
Yeah, true.
Right,
So we've got a
right.
question here as well. How long does it usually take to write a book? And they've clarified a chapter book.
Forever.
Mhm.
I am the slowest writer. So
I don't know. I might be slower than you. I think you've written 3 books and I've written 1. So.
Good point, Curtis.
Well, I think everyone works at their own speed and has their own kind of process. Like, I know people who will like write a lot of drafts and just keep revising, and that's how they get to, you know, the final thing. And then I know other people who do a lot of work in their head, where like they'll think about the story and how they want to write it for a long time before they actually ever like put any words down on paper or like start typing on the computer. So I think a lot of it is, you know, each person has to find, you know, what is one, you know, the thing that motivates you to write, right? But also like, what's the best way that you're going to be able to work, right? Do you have, you know, a day job? Do you have like family commitments? Do you have kids who are like home all the time right now? Like, how do you work around all that? And, you know, how do you know, tell the other people in your life, like LeeAnn was saying, like, you do have to make sacrifices, right? Like, you have to say like, okay, I'm not going to be able to like spend the next hour or whatever it is with you, because I have to like go and be by myself and write. If that's the way you have to do it, like you have to, you know, separate yourself and have quiet or your own space or whatever. So I don't think anyone should beat themselves up for, you know, being slow to write. I think it does take a lot of, you know, not necessarily practice, but just like trying things out and giving yourself, you know, the time and the space to figure out, okay, this is, you know, this is how I am able to write. Debbie?
Yeah, I would also say too, because of the fact that I'm writing lots of different things. I mean, if I piled up all the anthologies, all the print anthologies that I've been in over 25. So yes, it's taking me like 4 years to write my next book. Hopefully that's what, but I've also written probably 6 pieces that have been published also in that time. So, and that goes to Curtis's point of, it just depends on how you write. If you're somebody who really focuses for a year on one thing, you know, that might go quicker than somebody like me who's like, now I'm going to write a story about a zombie, you know, now I'm going to write a story about, and then I keep coming back to the big piece or the big manuscript that I'm working on. But I definitely, you know, and I write creative nonfiction pieces too, and humor pieces. And so. Yeah.
Well, and also if you, like me with this current work in progress that I have, I've changed the ages of the main characters several times, which is, and I apologize to my writing group constantly because they've had to read the same chapters over and over and over, but it's still really, I'm loving the process of developing the story in different ways with different ages, and just also discovering, like, I think for me, I really thought I had to carve out this niche as a young adult writer. For some, I got that into my head. Oh, I'm going to always be a young adult writer. And then I started reading a lot of fantasy written very recently by women, N.K. Jemisin and other writers who are so good at writing adult fantasy novels. And I was like, this is awesome. I want to do that. And so that's why I changed, so as a writer, you get inspired by different things and it can change your direction. We're a little ADD about that, some of us,
Yeah.
but that's okay, right?
It depends too on like the structure of your book. Like right now, the manuscript I'm working on is set actually in 2 different time periods. And I wrote the first draft like all over the place. And so like second draft, I'm trying to put it together like a weird puzzle. So like if you have a more complicated structure or multiple points of view or something like that, that book probably is going to take longer. LeeAnn and I have a great guy in our writing group who is retired, so he can focus. He was a chemical engineer, and he's really focused. He writes mysteries, but it's the same lead character, and a lot of the cast as supporting characters. And I don't know, what is he on his 6th or 7th or 8th?
This is his 8th or 9th book.
Yeah, but at this point, it's a well-oiled machine. He knows that. We know his main character. Sometimes we're like, I don't know if Cal would do that. Like we all know Cal so well that it's not. I don't want to say it's easier because that would be for Warren to say, but I do feel like doing sequels in that fashion, maybe you can do them quicker.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Diane is saying we need to wrap this up. All right. So thank you all very much for joining us and for answering these questions. It was neat to have the insider perspective on all of this. And I hope everybody will join us again later today. We've got more author readings at 1 o'clock. Ruby McConnell and Stephanie Feldstein will be joining us. So thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.